Alrada, the manager of the tide pool, was currently indisposed, and Hannah McClendon felt her patience begin to fray. She had submitted her report on Kalira after working on it until every angle was covered. It was exacting, capturing every detail of the Afrovi dinner she could recall. Then she spent nearly 3 hours trimming back every excess word. After checking the grammar, she tried looking at it with the sort of detachment she felt a professional spy or something ought to have. The language sort of failed around things like Solana gaped like a fish or looked like she was going to pee herself, so she trimmed it down. Besides, the sort of people reading this would want to know Kalira's state of mind, but not so much about Solana's. Satisfied with her efforts, she hit send, which led to her sitting alone outside his office until Jalissa arrived. "Finally," she hissed. "Where have you—" Jalissa arched one eyebrow toward Alrada's door, and Hannah shut up. People in the tide pool would want to know how her self-control was too. Jalissa would. Hiram would. Alrada definitely would, and the last thing she needed to do was look like she was falling apart over her first report. Starting over, she took a deep breath and casually waved at the door to his office. "Where have you been?" "Filing my own report?" Jalissa gave a quirky smile and settled into the seat next to hers. "Calm down. Alrada will still be having an early breakfast." Hannah stared. "It's 3 in the afternoon." "Like I said, early breakfast." Jalissa lolled back in her chair. "The tide pool may be open all hours, but it comes alive at night, and so does Alrada. Speaking of which, did you get any sleep?" Hannah tried biting her lip, but the yawn emerged anyway. "Maybe 3 hours? I wanted my first report to be perfect, so I triple-checked everything." Jalissa gave her a compassionate look, but shook her head. What do you mean? I got everything." Jalissa was immaculately turned out in a pleated V-neck blouse with a diamond necklace. Hannah no longer wasted time wondering if it was real, since past showed her what got swept up every morning. Women didn't just come to the tide pool for sex. Well, yes, they did come to the tide pool for sex, but the patrons came for information. While she was still unclear about where the fine line was between the two, it was comforting to know there was one. Sort of. After all, she was on the information side of the line. Definitely on the information side of the line. But while that was going on, it seemed everyone spent time showing off how much they could show off. As a display of excess, it was probably something only the capital could manage. The wealth of the Imperium was on display everywhere, but nobody so much as where the cream of the nobility were seen to be seen. And some goddess or other take pity on any duchess who wasn't entertaining a whole retinue. Nestled roughly between the heart of the city and the spaceport, all hours saw shipping magnates arriving from every world in the galaxy rub shoulders with princesses of industry and lawmakers, getting the news before anyone else while everyone ignored the staff. Where to go for a good time after clearing customs? The tide pool, of course. It wasn't just showing off. Deals that made her head spin were made over drinks, but when you came right down to it, it wasn't all that different than Dad going out to play cards, or sitting around the co-op playing checkers and chewing the fat. Things got done. Understandings were reached. Egos, and other things, were massaged, and reputations made. Aside from the other things, it was just a matter of scale. Okay, diamonds get dropped in with the ice cubes, and sapphires as big as my thumb get tucked down the waiter's tops, but that's how it is. While there was an element of, if you've got it, flaunt it, everyone was watching everyone else, which meant flaunt it to prove it. And so the customers did, and the tide pool staff made sure everyone had a good time while they were doing it. No spectacle was too extravagant, and some of the things in the back rooms, well, there were species she'd never heard of, but she had to admit a few of the guys were pretty tasty. It's not like I'm not allowed to look. I've dated, right? Even past looked pretty cute in that. Hannah? Jalissa cocked her head. Still with me? What? Yes, of course. Good, because after this is sparring practice. If you're going to adjust to the evening shift, I think we need to keep you up for a few more hours. And don't look at me like that. Jalissa's smile was warm, but there was a hint of challenge as she cracked her knuckles. You won't surprise me this time. Ugh, fine. Hannah smoothed out her blouse and had a flash of clothes envy. Shopping was somewhere on the menu after she settled in. Right now she looked like a fish out of water, and she knew it. There was a laundry list of things for being brought on staff, from sorting her access and getting a permanent room, to starting up her training in earnest. In the meantime, Jalissa's only order had been, wherever you can, act like you belong there. Just now, that was outside Alrada's office, so she sat up a little straighter. So, if it's all in my report, why are we meeting Alrada? Normally we wouldn't. Our job is collecting the raw info in places where a suit cam would be detected. We commit it all to memory. We do the job, whatever it is, and then we get out. The debrief will go over everything from what time the desk has arrived to what colour shirt Professor Warwick was wearing, if they think it's relevant. But this is about Princess Kalira. Alrada wants his own take because it's that important. Fate of empires kind of stuff. So, no pressure or anything, she said wryly, managing not to fidget. Fidgeting never looked cool, and she had to start somewhere. That's why our patrons pay us the big credits. We keep our heads while everyone else is losing theirs. Or giving it. Jalissa nodded firmly, then winked like a lecherous purple imp. God to stop you blushing, country girl. That is such a tell. Hannah rolled her eyes, turning redder by the second. So, embrace the suck? Nice double entendre. Jalissa's grin went from impish to sexual harassment levels. I think I'll steal that one for myself. I will not blush. I will not blush. It had to be a Zen thing. Or at least exposure. Something. Fine. Fate of empires, gloom, despair, and agony on me, yada yada yada. So what now? I thought Prince Larau was supposed to be a family guy. It's not like he's going to come here. Is he? Jalissa's smile disappeared, as if it had never been, and she nodded once. No chance. It really isn't an image with him, but his wife, the Duchess, she has a rep from way back. Not for guys, but she was interior, high-born, but pushed herself with the school of hard knocks anyway. Practical, smart, knows what she wants and isn't above getting bloody if she has to. That sounded like half the women back home, at any Farm Bureau meeting. I can respect that, I guess. Me too, but it's a matter of context. Duchess Tesserin does not have a rep for keeping things proportional. Jalissa gave a half-hearted shrug. I mean, no one wants a leader that will roll over on you, but I'd rather have a lot of rumbling than a volcano. The prince may be the nicest guy in the world, but no one expects his wife to be content as consort, and that'd be bad news for everyone. Which is why people want to know about Kalira's temperament. They want to know which side to back if things get nasty. Right the first time. The Empress will make her decision, sure, but she's still going to be listening to the Assembly of Nobles. Sure, she could act unilaterally, but any Empress who made a frequent habit of that found it didn't agree with her health. Right now, her being off shill is cashing in a lot of political favours. So she's more powerful than anyone, but not more powerful than everyone. Hannah turned that over in her mind. It made sense. It even worked from a Shilvanti kind of view. But if Tesserin is so smart and ruthless, why hasn't she made a big power move? And that's another question. If you ask me, it's the smart portion talking. I'm betting she isn't sitting still, but won't make any overt moves unless she feels desperate, or the situation changes. Tom looked at the picture on Dess's omnipad, remembering it well enough. eBay had survived the Shilvanti. The Imperial credit went a long way, and he'd spent those credits generously when building a collection for the Academy. Travelling the globe with Mevere, he tried to wrap up Earth like a present. The best way to show what Earth had to offer was to put it all on display as a living show of diversity. Something to be cherished, rather than subsumed, because then those things which appealed to the Shilvanti would disappear, or at least be put at risk. Overfishing on a cultural level would only turn Earth into a tourist trap. Shirts off, open 9 to 5, short time. Avoiding that fate had been his motive, but in the process, He'd come to know Shovanti as individuals, rather than interchangeable faces of the Imperium. Fallen in love with Mevere. What began as a practical effort to broaden her perspectives had become more, and he had no regrets. And his basic motives remained valid. Either way, their evenings together going over eBay to create the Academy collection fleshed it out as each item was delivered. It hadn't prevented Miv from purchases, but her offer to buy Las Meninas had been an isolated incident. Instead, she turned him loose with a terrifying amount of credits. He'd done his best, even if it got a bit silly towards the end. Given the Shovanti predilection for originals, he tried to obtain photographs and paintings of every culture he could manage. The one on the pad came from one of several sales of Native Americana. Nestled amongst the tintype photographs and union cases, he'd only been able to consider it properly while picking out which items to place on display. The process of taking old photographs lasted minutes, so no one smiled, but the Native Americans staring back at the camera had no reason to smile. The images from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School were heartbreaking testimony to cultural stripping at its worst, everything he hoped to avoid for humanity. Paul Simon nailed it. Better or worse, everything looked stark in black and white. Desi had finished their work for the morning by showing Suzuku the collection. As he'd suspected, the entries on several items could be better fleshed out, but he'd never expected they might come across something so personal. Desi had apologized for dragging him away from Solani, but she was in Miv's care, and while he might have thought twice about walking alone in town, the campus was home, and he felt secure there. And if I'm wrong, my wife has a commando team. Apologies aside, he could tell that Desi was upset, and she said Suzuku. Andy, as she called him, was not quite upset. Perturbed, perhaps. Definitely disquieted. He'd let the alliteration go as he wound his way to meet them at the office he shared with Mevere, where Desi laid out the situation with the pictures. She seemed more upset than he was, although if Andre was upset, he was silent, merely cocking his head to listen, while Desi explained the photograph. Natives in the modern era. And that some were native Cilicians. His family. Behind the two large desks, Tom set down her omnipad and nodded. So... And this is my office, my chair, even my pet rock. I'm comfortable waiting you out. The silence dragged on for an uncomfortable moment, while Andre sat like a statue. Tom's patience was rewarded. So, I was surprised to see that particular class photo, and I was curious, Professor. Why is it labelled that way? And why is it stuck in the back, gathering dust? Suzuku leaned forward, his voice taut as a wire. Tom arched an eyebrow in reply, studying his captive. The word poured at the moment, though he couldn't help but notice it was Professor now instead of Sir. Mr. Sheckler said, "You've had a lifetime of living this reality, and know some of these people by name, whereas I've had maybe 3 minutes to consider what Deshin just told me. So, if you would allow me a moment to gather my thoughts." "Of course, Professor. I do not wish to be rude." Suzuku, Andre, as he seemed easier styling himself, settled back on his chair. His head lowered until his chin rested almost on his chest, his eyes lidded so deeply it looked like he'd fallen asleep. Tom couldn't make heads or tails of Andre's posture. Is this anger? I don't blame him in the least if it is. Tom picked the omnipad back up and looked at the image again. As a gesture, it didn't help, but leaving the pad on the desk felt like he'd cast it off. That wasn't the case, but picking it up again was something to fill the time while he thought. As a rule, I take a while to come around to my point, but I do get there in the end, if you'll give me the time. I promise to hear you out. Father, Desi was leaning forward in her chair, as if she might step in, but stopped when he held up a hand. Very few teenagers would do so, and he silently thanked the benefit of being a father figure in the Shovanti sense. As for her intercession, she was being protective of them both, and his thoughts flashed forward to the day she'd finally bring home a date. But that was ahead of him, and this was now, so you think you can tell? Heaven from hell? Blue skies from pain? Do I think I can tell what he's gone through? No, but that's not the job today. The refrain passed through his mind as softly as a breeze. Andy looked up silently and gave a single slow nod before hunching up again. There was an odd tension to it, and Tom considered the man and the picture, trying to reconcile the one with the other. It felt as if an accusation had been laid at his door. Even knowing what this is, I can't know what he feels. We're far from Earth and still sitting behind our veils. We're both humans, but these are his tribe. And I look like the people that did this to them. His tribe. My tribe. It never fades away. Deshin, you're not familiar with the worst that humans can do, though the next week or two is going to lay that out. I suspect Mr. Sheklisek could teach a masterclass on some of humanity's evils. Tom set Deshin's pad down and nudged it back toward her. We'll discuss this later, along with the other things I promised. But for the moment, I believe this gentleman deserves a meeting of minds, and I need to give him my fullest attention. Few humans would have accepted a line like that, yet Desi nodded and watched them both fretfully. Despite their towering predilection toward matriarchy, Shovanti men, particularly fathers, had pull, at least if the woman was disposed to it. Thankfully, Desi gave him that respect. With so much to unpack, he owed her that conversation. Promised it to her and Melondia alike. He could table it for the moment, but not indefinitely. Which left the matter at hand. The Socratic in him questioned everything, while his inner Taoist said to know the good and the bad as part of the whole. But Andrei Sheklisek posed his own questions about how he was portrayed to the rest of the galaxy, and really, there was only one answer. There's an aphorism that those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Santayana. Andrei shifted forward again, eyes springing open as he sat up, looking unnervingly stern for his age. I do know that one, though I don't know much about him. Good cultural philosopher. Hit his stride in the 1930s, which I suppose makes this a teaching moment. Tom hid his annoyance at the interruption, while chiding himself for getting used to the girl's deference. At the same time, he spotted a flash of annoyance in Andrei's face. Here are some that come closer to home. The more things change, the more they stay the same. That was a man named Carr, though I prefer, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss. Andrei's face seemed to fall, if it was even possible from its present position, but he lowered his head again, breaking eye contact. Tom waited for him to speak, expecting something, but the man remained silent. Taken as a pattern, he didn't know what that meant, but it felt like an opportunity. I don't know how clear you are about events right before the Imperium arrived. The President at the time had a particular fondness for denigrating people by their race too. Tom tapped a finger toward the picture. Unfortunately, invalidating someone's identity wasn't new. And while I'm not fond of being from the sex planet, the Shovanti haven't forced us to wear their suits. Now you may point out I'm wearing a school uniform and you're in that rather elaborate affair, but unlike that photograph, the Imperium doesn't make us play dress-up. Dom stared at the fleeting look of tense rage that passed over and through the man before he visibly relaxed himself. When Andrei spoke, it was in a soft and low tone. Might I ask you a question in English, Professor? Tom nodded with a glance at Desi. The man leaned forward, locking eyes with Tom. Are you aware of an Imperial program called the Raising Man Initiative? Tom thought for a moment before shaking his head. Andre seemed to deflate, sighing heavily before switching back to Vatica. The pictures in the display are important. The context is more important. Otherwise, wounds will fester, and there will be no healing. I can't say I heard of Raising Man, but I heard of more than a few misadventures. The POW camps, the medical experiments. I even lived a few, but I'm also aware they were shut down. Tom studied the young man as he hunkered back and mimicked the posture, settling back in his chair rather than leaning forward as a sign of attention. I'm not an apologist for the Imperium, but I never had the illusion that the Imperium is going to disappear in a puff of wishful thinking. Imperial law works differently from what we were used to, but people were held to account. Maybe I'm old and jaded, but I never wrung my hands waiting for a lavish apology. Sometimes you have to get on with living, and be thankful when at least there's some justice. Tom wanted to push. He felt like he should push, but Andre had withdrawn in on himself again, leaving Tom with little to go on. I promised to hear you out, but as I asked, please, do me the courtesy first. Andre sat back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. Defensive, but he's still here. Tom thought back across the years. My mother used to say, there's nothing new under the sun. Same sentiment with a different veneer, but I always hoped she was wrong. Now the Imperium upset our apple cart, and it's my deepest hope humanity will put this crap behind us. Our cycle has been broken, and while we can't forget it, I profoundly hope we'll learn from our past without dwelling there. Andre wouldn't look him in the eye, and where he expected a response, none came but silence, but that seemed to be his way. His reserve was a quiet defense, but eye contact or no, Tom knew he had Andre's attention. Two things, Mr. Sheckler said. First, after this conversation, I hope to regain your goodwill and your respect, as it seems that I've lost them. Tom raised an eyebrow but kept his tone light, trying to establish a connection. Secondly, if you want an answer, you need to ask me a question first. You and Desi have come here and told me what this is. Justifiably, you have a lot of emotional investment in this piece, but you didn't actually ask anything. At least, not yet. Andre started, but stumbled, his face awash in confusion before he flushed. No, sir. I suppose I didn't. The man looked him in the eyes again, and Tom felt like he was making progress. Which brings me to asking what you think. I cannot know your innermost thoughts about this image. If this were a looted Nazi painting, I'd return it. But this isn't so much stolen property as documentation of a crime, Tom said quickly, rather than letting Andy stew. Now here's my problem, and I very much hope you can help me. Tom considered Andre, as he cocked his head in the Chavanti manner, clearly inviting more. Don't put him down as arrogant. Tom smiled at that and leaned forward, trying to reach out across their divide, and the desk. Good and bad, I teach about humanity, letting all the poisons that lurk beneath the mud hatch out. I offer them up, put them on display for my students to learn from. One-on-one, I think the people we know see us as individuals. Desi nodded, and much to his relief, Andre did the same. As for the exhibit on humanity, well, a visitor isn't stuck in my classroom and gets little more than a cursory exposure. They won't know us as people, so I focused on the we aren't sex-crazed barbarians theme and left it at that. Dershin started blushing furiously, and he pretended not to notice. As far as I'm concerned, that photograph belongs to you. It's literally your family. So my question is, what do you want done with it? Tell the truth about that photograph and that collection. Tell the Chavanti what was done and why. Tell them that once I was not human in the eyes of many of our race. I was a savage. That they once said, to save the man we must kill the Indian. Because as horrible as that was, as evil as it was, evil failed. I am still here despite all the power of the United States and the Canadian government brought to bear to destroy us. We survived, but we carry that history and those scars still, even after a century. Andy leaned forward, locking eyes with Tom as his voice grew in conviction. "Tell them, so they never try it again." The words came out like a flood, but once finished, Andy leaned backward, lifting his head imperiously. Enter the warrior, today's Tom Sawyer. I'm a firm believer that the world works best when you work with it, so I think I can offer you an acceptable compromise. Tom rubbed his chin, considering the implications. There were always implications, but some things needed doing. Now, to my next concern over the exhibit, if you have concerns regarding looted art, I'd like to discuss any other pieces in our Native American collection. I try to be careful, but it doesn't hurt to be sure.
"It could have been worse," Ratch said. "It doesn't look like the skin was broken."
Shrek waved a clawed hand at Ratch, though her heart wasn't really in it.
"If you even think about shaving my asag, I'll eat your liver and make you watch." "I still say a little antibacterial would." "Don't! Just fucking don't!"
Shrek's asag flared up, and her claws flexed like she meant it.
"You say one more word about first aid, and I swear to the Dark Mother I will not be responsible for my actions." "I didn't know you could toss toddlers that far,"
Gore said fretfully, as they trudged back to their rooms. As escapes went, it wasn't exactly like they cleared out a trafficking den, or knocked over a fried slug stall, but still.
"They wanted the pole, didn't they?" Shrek said defensively. "It was a safe space." "Well, it was after you set the tent on fire," he said, disconsolately. "You realize this isn't going to look good. Not exactly covert." "I didn't eat anyone. Besides, we crossed off covert back at the spaceport," Sashan said stoically. "Still, we're getting paid. It's just one more job. If we act fast, the Duchess might not even hear about this, right?" "It was her niece's party," Shrek said dully. "Besides, there are rules." "And you're a picky eater," Ratch muttered. "Okay, maybe not. But she does want us to do a job for her," Gore said brightly. "Seriously, that isn't just the fish breakfast talking. Besides, we could do something else. Maybe settle down just a bit. Shill's a big place. Lots of opportunities." "I don't know, girls. I mean, that Menth house wasn't so bad. It would clean up with some work."
Gore slipped an arm around Shrek's waist, and while she grumbled, she didn't push him away.
"A lot of work, but I bet we could get it cheap," Sash nodded. "Come on, you did like the place." "Yeah, and do what? If you say guest shots at Janzi and the Funshine Band, I won't speak to you for a week." "Promises, promises," Sash grinned. "I mean, come on. We don't always have to be just hired muscle, right? What about being the gals who hire the muscle? All the fixers got their start somewhere. Who runs this patch anyway?" "Some shill bitch named Jara," Ratch muttered. "Well, maybe it's time she retired."
Ratch's asag perked up a bit at that.
"You really think we could get the house cheap?" "I know it," Ratch nodded confidently. "It's been for sale for the last 3 months and no takers. It's a steal." "Well, you make that sound good," Shrek said, testing the idea aloud. "Just imagine, the 4 of us settling down as respectable crime lords. It could be worse, right?" "John Z and the Happy Pet and Funshine Band. Hooray!" "Shut up, Gore." "With musical mystery every single day, with our claws a strumming and tails a wagging." "Gore, I will hurt you." "The Funshine Band with— Ow! Doofus."
The girls remained after the movie to play games. No food was involved, and That's My Locknart was a ridiculous pastime, so Sinshiki made her way home through the moonless night and opened her senses.
"I can feel it in the air."
The Erbian scent presented a dilemma. Honor and marriage were at stake. It came down to getting past the right gift, which would happen if she had to shove it into Kalis' hands, just to let Sunchaser seal the deal. Not that she blamed Kalis. Picking the right gift, under an honourable pretext, was no easy matter. It certainly wasn't a holiday game. The problem with Rakiri was not their strengths. Strong in the most literal sense, they were also gifted hunters, which made them worthy. Broadly speaking, the problem was they were far too much like Bezrin, which made them competition. In a struggle for survival, you did not abide those who could take what was yours. Of course, she only had Sunchaser's word about their table manners, but so be it. Rakiri were capable, yet they lacked that certain touch of the exotic. Besides, none of them were personal acquaintances. The Shovanti had strength, but their night vision was inferior, while their speed and dexterity were sorely wanting by comparison. Their hearing was unremarkable, as tested by the constant whine of the mini-cameras getting on her nerves. But Shovanti were now her allies, and she got him past Anir. He was not a traditional boy, but giving him the same thing twice lacked refinement. He might even consider it lazy, and there was no basis for a relationship. Zinshiki slipped into her dorm and paused at her door. The hallway was quiet, though Kamara now owned a human guitar. The pleasing cacophony had come through the wall all morning. Apparently, Ziggy played guitar, and that was good enough for Kamara. Spiders from Mars were mentioned, and while arachnids were a common life form, the only listing for Mars described it as a barren world, devoid of native life. It was all very confusing. She entered and tossed off her jacket, then undid her skirt to free her Asayak. It was a blessed relief, and she fell on her bed, contemplating her thoughts in the darkness. Rakiri and Shovanti were out, and about Helcom, the less that was said, the better. Beneath their shy, retiring manner, people forgot how treacherous the little wenches were. No matter. Apparently they didn't taste very nice and were a bit stringy. The Urbian, however. Zinshiki ran her tongue over her incisors before picking up her Omnipad stylus. There was work to be done, and she still had 2 items to return, though that was only a minor chore. Dropping things under the couch in the day room or the back of drawers, trivial compared to the effort of acquiring them. She swiped off the list, then rolled over and pulled up a photograph of Citri/Delicious. Sunchaser had never spoken of the Urbians in more than passing, as their world was far from Pesh. It was possible, even likely, their Pathfinder had never tasted one. Citri/Delicious seemed unlikely material as a hahakt, though a sample of one meant nothing. Still, rarity was a mark in her favour as a wedding gift, though acquiring a pound or 2 posed the delicate problem of having the right to do so. Flagrantly eating people was wrong on so many levels, and the practice spoke of the struggle to survive on Pesh. After all, conversation was a key to long-term survival. Every principle held that all life should be cherished, but no one refused a good barbecue. But when bands went to war, all bets were off. The only sensible thing to do was sharpen your knives, claws, and roasting spits. It was a traditional, reasoned response, though since the Alliance opened Pesh to the galaxy, traditions began to change. No longer trapped on an impoverished world, her people had escaped the clutches of the Alliance to boldly go to the nearest buffet. As a thoroughly modern girl, it was silly to think of eating other sentients. Except for her hahakt, of course. That was another matter entirely. A name was at stake, and her future obligated her to serve Thomas Warwick until she served him. Possibly stewed? Seasoning would merit further consideration. Older human might be gamey. Yet Citri/Delicious was another matter of honour. As a captive, she was practically begging to be eaten. To eat or not to eat? That was the question. Taking out her stylus, she considered the girl's midriff and dotted off a line between the ribs and loin. As a captive, she should be eaten. The hips were curvaceous yet firm, and despite the gym clothes, it was easy to mark off the round and the shank. But she isn't my captive, so I don't have the right. Pulling up the picture she snapped, Zinshiki considered the Urbian's long, powerful legs. Her surveillance in the gym had provided vital information. The girl was an athlete, so an option presented itself. A contest. If Delicious could best her, then she was worthy, and eating a worthy captive was honourable. Provided she tried her best, then all was fair. So long as Citri/Delicious won, she could be slaughtered. And Kalis would finally have something to present to Past. Dark mother! But getting a man a gift was hard work. Aluntel walked primly down the path from his jailer's strange museum abode. Snippets of the conversations he'd had with his jailer and host rolled over and over again in his mind. So many things he thought he'd known conflicted with what the professor had said, and he'd had proof. The least troubling was Lord Warwick's statement on humanity's Second World War and the treatment of the Native Americans. All the movies he'd watched with Andy made it clear that humanity's Second Global War was one of good versus evil, with the forces of justice prevailing over the wicked. Andy has spoken proudly of their acts of heroism during the conflict. As for the treatment of Andy's forebearers' natives, it always seemed to be corrupt and honourless. If only they'd have placed His Grace Duke Wayne as the American ambassador to the tribal nations, there would have been no need for the Indian Wars at all. He'd have to ask Andy about it later. Perhaps Lord Warwick comes from a different country. That might explain things. Far more disturbing was the loss of the Heraldic. Even worse, at least for humanity, their use of atomics caused horrifying mutations in the planet's native fauna. Giant reptiles rode through coastal cities, doing battle with something that looked like a larval tricky. Aluntel felt himself shivering, but it had nothing to do with the evening chill. While obviously a fiction, it was entirely too cavalier. Human videos could entertain, but the first show was in stark contrast to another where a cowboy straddled such a weapon, cheering as he fell to his doom. Andy even tried to tell him the solution was to duck and cover. Psst, honestly, as if he was born yesterday. Old rumours, and a rather unfortunate nickname given to his friend, resurfaced, and Aluntel sniffed loudly as he deliberately dismissed them. Atomic Andre indeed. Those were lies then, and they're lies now. He stopped as he stared at the doors that led into the apartment complex, thankful the ale had a men's section at all, and that the professor had been gracious enough to let them have it for their own. Aluntel settled on a conclusion that seemed to fit what he knew with what he'd learned. Humans are so contradictory. That declaration was enough to clear his mind for the two more important tasks that lay before him. First, to tactfully and gracefully extricate friend Andy from whatever machinations his cousin must surely be cooking up for him. I mustn't damage his reputation or his standing, after all. If I execute this correctly, friend Andy might very well come away with a positive connection in the Shrivanti Imperial Court. The thought of Andy as an Imperial courtier threatened to overwhelm Aluntel with a fit of delighted giggles. And why not, since Prince Adam's always flitting off? Andy could scandalise half the peerage by his presence alone. The door to their shared apartment opened, and Aluntel found Andy with his nose buried in his omnipad. Hearing him enter, Aluntel felt a jolt of concern electrify him, as his friend looked up with that sour frown he sometimes adopted when something went amiss. Al? Have you read this yet? Read what? Aluntel quickly sat down on the opposite end of the couch, waiting for his friend to arrive at whatever was bothering him. Andy tapped his omnipad and showed him a wall of text punctuated with little pictures. This file for the costume dance the professor wants to put on. Why, not yet. He only just sent it to me. Aluntel dug his own omnipad out and opened the file, skimming through it, trying to find what troubled friend Andy so. He's got a pretty ambitious plan for a last-minute dance, that's for sure. Aluntel looked up and canted his head. Now you've either said too much or too little, and my credits are on too little. You know the kind of clout and resources these Imperial nobles can bring to bear. I mean, there's a Chelksa as one of his hand-picked students. That family can almost snap their fingers and produce a planet. His friend quirked an eyebrow at him. Remember the dance scene in Memphis Belle? Alantel sputtered for effect. You mean that rather harrowing movie where they somehow made flying an exercise in claustrophobia? Yes, I remember. That, but gender swapped, Andy replied in a flat tone. Oh my, no! Alantel felt himself tense up in apprehension. I can't. He wouldn't. I look terrible in brown. Andy shook his head and looked back down at his omnipad. Oh, it's worse. The girls get to dress up as the Yanks and the Brits. He wants us gents in zoot suits. Those last two words had to be English, because they made no sense in Vatican. Zoot. Suits? What in the deeps is a zoot suits? Andy shook his head with a laugh, before standing up and acquiring his lovely emerald jacket. Check your file. I've got to run. I'm meeting Miss Pelavon in the library. Alantel started, twisting around as the tall human strode towards the door. Do be careful, friend Andy. It's late. You'll be all alone in that library with her. I worry for you. Honestly, I do. Call me if you need a timely rescue. Weren't you the one going on about me getting into another scandal the other day? The self-satisfied riposte caused Alantel to purse his lips in frustration. Yes, well, perhaps I was a bit. I was overwrought by the journey and awed by the fact that you managed to escape molestation. I clearly wasn't giving sound advice. You know how I can get. Rarely, but still. A genuine laugh of affection burst out of his friend. I'll bear the rescue in mind, Al. See you in a couple of hours. The door closed before Alantel could react, leaving him alone in the apartment without even the comfort of Puck to distract him from his newfound dilemmas. There only seemed to be one thing to do while he awaited his next appointment. With a heavy sigh, he opened the file and searched for the infamous zoot suits. Amending his thoughts on the spelling, he swiped open the file, and he studied the long, baggy pants and the high waistline that drew up to the chest. The ensemble was set off by a long coat hanging down to the knees and wide-padded shoulders, while a shirt with sharply tapered collars fled out to either side. By the goddess, it's amazing! It's so bold, so masculine, and there's so much space to make a statement. Plans coalesced in his mind, as he dialed the perfect person to help him. Hello, Cigaro? Yes, I do apologize for the late call. Yes, they're treating us very well, thank you. I have a favor to ask of the fashionistas and Grand Meister Vunuzzi. There's to be a costume ball up here with the ailing soon, and... No, it's an educational event, so it's perfectly legal. We need as many boys as we can get, dressed in suits made to the specs for the file I'm about to send you. And trust me, you'll simply adore them. The only ball of the season might be held at the Ale, but it's mine. All mine, mine, mine. A house of Lehman triumph. After all, there was always room for improvement. Think bold, Cigaro. Vibrant florals, dashing painslits, with sequins, animal prints, velvet. Velvet animal print? Of course! A true Vascon can make the best of any situation.